So today is our first class that we are actually live streaming. So we're on twitch.tv/Bernina of Naperville channel right now. And we're getting ready to start our programming Pizzaz class. So as we get settled and ready, we're gonna go live at about 10 o'clock, which is in 1 minute. We do have one person watching, which is exciting. And I had this, this is propped up with books, charm packs, and so forth. And I had a much better situation earlier, but they made me turn my phone to the side. So now it's not as perfect as it could be, but I'm gonna try just a little bit. So bear with me out there. No sleeping. Can I help you with that? Oh, this is so much better. Yay. A little bit better. Don't get seasick for my viewer out there, please. Sorry. Oh, oop. Okay, I think that's the best it's gonna get. So I apologize, but we will get other webcams. We have another viewer. And yeah, so thanks for joining us. I gotta make sure that we've got everybody here in the classroom that's supposed to be here. So I'm going to take a roll call, but I am not gonna say your names to protect the innocent, all right? All right.
We're not innocent.
DC is here. UA is here. GS. I've got another GS that's not here. I know. And SU is here. All right. I think that's 5, and there's 4. We're going to go ahead and get started. So give me 1 second because I'm not used to these live things. I forgot the handouts. Hang on. We're going to be working from these, and this is just a sample out of your Mastering Your Bernina machine. Hang on 1 second. We've got 3 people. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started in just a minute. That should be everything. Sherlyn, I might have accidentally given you two of the same, but here, there you go. All right, so now we have our handouts. Okay, so what we're gonna work with today first is we're actually gonna be on preparing to stitch. And we cover a lot of these in the Introduction to Your Machine class, but there are a few other things on this topic that I think is important. We could explore these machines for a long time without ever actually pressing on the foot control, because you know there's so many things that you can do with them. So the first thing that I want to talk about is personalizing the screen of your machine. And so the one thing that we're going to get used to using today, the one button that I want you to remember, are the ones with the little gears. And there's a little bit of glare on the screen, but if you have a 790 or I believe an 880 or a 770, you should have a gear button here. And see where this is here on my screen? Let me just make a little round here. And Debbie, yours is going to be right down there. Okay. I think we still have the grid on there. Okay, all right, there we go. All right, so you've got your, all right, so did everybody find the gears?
Yeah. You touch it?
Yeah. Okay, so I want you to touch that. Touch your gears. Right there. Okay? All right, excellent. I will be touching my gears. All right. So let's touch our gears. Ah, big sad. It's not working on my simulator.
Oh, there it works.
That's not the gears. All right, so what I'm going to do then, when you touch the gears, you have another screen that's going to allow you to hit program, and it looks like a person with a little plus sign there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to hit that button and you're going to get a screen like this. Now this little dude was working just a moment ago. I'm just going to, give me 1 minute, I'm going to restart it. What else? What are the first lessons? If something's not working, turn it off and turn it on again. Okay. So I want you to hit the little dude with a plus sign, and this is going to allow us to pick some things. Now, I don't really change this, but if I did, I would have it say something like, "Good morning, genius," or something like that. This is the writing that's going to be on your machine when you turn it on as you wait for it to boot up. So, you know, something inspirational, like, you know, in these times, like, wash your hands and don't touch your face. Only touch your sewing machine, okay? So anyway, so you can change that here. Now it starts with welcome. So we would need to delete to get rid of the welcome, to write what we want to say. So, and you can make it lowercase, you can add letters, you can write in emoji. I'm gonna just write in caps because I like to yell. Hello. Genius, but let's spell genius wrong on purpose. G-E-N-I-O-U-S. There we go. That's perfect. Now let's add a little apostrophe here. And now I'm going to hit the green check mark, which is here. Okay, so now it's going to say hello, genius. Then I can pick colors. Now the default color is blue, but you know, in like when I was 14, I would have wanted gray. now that I'm getting older, I probably like pink, or some of you know me, teal is like my absolute most favorite color. Then we've got like this kind of smooth texture. Then there's like a corduroy texture. There's like grandma's bathroom wallpaper. There's Swiss dot. There's poinsettias. I don't even know what that is. The Bernina logo, in case you forgot what kind of machine you have. And I think this kind of looks like my heart rate monitor, but I think it's supposed to be the Bernina mountain. Okay, so you can pick whatever on here that you want, and then we close it out, and you're gonna notice that your screen has changed on the back of the screen. Did everybody have success doing that? Mm-hmm. All right, excellent. So for those of you working on, I think we only have one person working on one of our machines. I can't wait to see what you do to this machine, because when I turn it on, you know what's gonna happen? I'm gonna be like, what? Who's been doinking with this machine? But anyway, all right. So that was pretty easy. Now, what was the button that I said was gonna be your friend when you do this? The gears. So don't forget, now we wanna customize some more stuff. So let's go to the gears again. And then I want you to go to this zigzaggy, straight stitch and zigzaggy button, and we're gonna hit the plus sign. Then we get a lot of more options here, and one of them is, how many of you are kind of annoyed a little bit with when you start sewing, it does like this straight tacking stitch? I don't use it in my sewing, but that doesn't mean that some of you wouldn't use it. But if you find that it is challenging for your sewing, you can turn it off. And so it is this little needle that's pointing down to a pretzel. That's really a knotting stitch, but for lack of a better description, it looks like a pretzel. And there's this little sliding button here, and I can turn that off. So you see here, I'm right here on this part of the screen right here, so you would turn that off. So now when we start sewing for our very first stitch, it's just gonna sew, it's not gonna pause and take a few stitches. Yes?
Are these all instructions for embroidery too, or just the sewing part?
So we had a question that, are these instructions for just sewing, or does this also include embroidery? And in this section, this is just for the sewing, okay? That's what that straight stitch and the zigzag symbol that we did represented, was our sewing settings. Then we have some other options, and I'm just gonna go down here. So now another button, so now I'm gonna go over what these are. This is going to alter the upper thread tension, and that looks like your tension button, and this is gonna alter it per the whole machine. So if you think that your tension, for whatever thread, for whatever application you're doing, if you think that this is, you wanna just up your tension or just loosen your tension, this would be like a master area where you can loosen all of the tension settings on your machine by like however much you want here. I personally have never done this before, but you have the ability to do this. And so you would do that either by hitting the minus button or hitting the plus button. Now, for your own safety, you can only go up 2 notches or down 2 notches. And then if for whatever reason you want to go back to normal, you press this button. Because see how as I increase this little guy here turns yellow, and that means I've adjusted it somehow. I can also drag my slider, and I could use the knobs, the multifunction knobs on the machine. But I really like the way my tension is sewing, particularly on this simulator. It does perfect job every time. So that's what that one is. So now I sent you a handout about breadcrumbs, but while we're looking at this, I want to just point out what that is. So remember, our first step is that we click the gears. Then next to it, we have a straight stitch and a zigzag. That represents that we're in the sewing settings folder. Then we're also in the tension folder of the sewing settings. If I close this box, I'm just going to go back to my sewing screen. but I really want to play with a lot of other things that were in that folder. So if we go back to the settings, I was in the sewing settings, and now that, remember we just looked at tension, we looked at the knot, we also have stitch speed. So that's what the little dial, looks like a clock, but it's really a speedometer. And so this speed here is going to allow us to adjust the peak speed of the machine. There might be many reasons why you want to do this. One of them might be if you have a child sewing on your machine, or if you just really are timid and you are a little bit afraid to just put the pedal to the metal. This will allow us to really sew slowly. So this is going to be inside the machine, we're adjusting the peak speed. Now, that also doesn't, we still have that sliding motor speed on the front of the machine. So if you have set your peak speed to 800 and now you go to your sliding speed, that's gonna set your peak speed to 400 when you go to half speed. So it's gonna be really slow. So just keep that in mind. And this, once again, is not something I've ever really played with. I wish that it had turbo boost rather than slow down personally, but that's just me. And so if you make any changes to this, just like our other piece, there's a yellow around showing you that, hey, you have adjusted this from the default setting. And then if you want to go back, just click it with the yellow box around it, and it goes back to the full. So now the breadcrumb. This is our speedometer for this motor speed. This is our sewing settings. So instead of clicking the X up here in the top right-hand corner, I'm actually going to click the straight. And that gets us back to this screen. So now we know what tension, we know the sewing speed, we know the tie off at the beginning. There's a new button here, and I swear I can't even describe this. It looks like a hand doing this and pointing to a trail of flags. This is another one that is very useful. So let's click this one. And this one now, we have all of these choices on the screen because we have, on your machine, we have external buttons that allow us to do things. So there's an external button that allows us to bring the presser foot up. There's an external button that allows us to cut. There's one for quick reverse. There's one for knotting. There's one for needle down, and there's one for pattern end. So the default settings are pretty much straight up what they are. In this case, if you don't like the hover feature, when you press the needle up or the presser foot up down button, it will default to hover. So when you put the presser foot down, it goes down, but it doesn't go all the way, and it doesn't really clamp down on the material. So this is where you could change that to where you use that button to put your presser foot down, and it's gonna clamp down and stay that way. But sometimes if we're working on a fussy project, I'll give you an example of when you're lining up a buttonhole, you might wanna put the foot down just a little bit, and then you wiggle it under there just to get it right on the spot. Then you either press your foot control to get it to clamp down, you use your freehand system to get it to clamp down, or you just simply start sewing. So there are different ways to adjust this. So let's go ahead and select the presser foot up down button in this screen. So now here we see an animation of what it's doing. And so we've got the presser foot up down button that's indicating what we're doing here. And we have, it's 2 millimeters is the default setting. If you wanted it to hover more, you can certainly go higher. However, if you want to turn it off, you're going to go to 0. And so you just hit this button, the minus button, and you go all the way to 0.0 and press your X. Now, I probably shouldn't have pressed the X. I did an oop. What should I have told you to do?
Go back.
Use your breadcrumbs, right? That's what they're all mouthing, use your breadcrumbs. This audience, they're very afraid of having their voices on video. I promised them that I wouldn't show their faces, but they're very timid. We've got a lady in the back that's doing some kind of pantomime here. Okay. So let's go to our gears. And then we've got, we were in this section, the stitching. And now we're going back to our weird hand touching things. Okay, so now we can, so that was presser foot up down. Just under presser foot up down is the scissors. You can do other things to the scissors. So when you hit the scissors, if you don't adjust this, it's just gonna cut. That's it. However, we can actually have it knot, and we can have it knot in place, or we can have it knot where it does like little stitches really close together. And you can go up to 6 little stitches. And this might be something that if you're quilting with the dual feed, or if you're quilting with the walking foot, or some sort of straight line quilting, this will provide you a little bit better knotting than going reverse, because you know you see it ugly on both, or you see it kind of thick, and you don't want that for your machine quilting. Another thing that you have is this knotting feature, which makes the little cross. And that is a little bit better for doing decorative stitches. So if you hit this after you do a decorative stitch with your scissors, you're gonna get a little stitch that kind of knots it in place and is less obtrusive looking. So I'm gonna go back up to my breadcrumbs, and I'm hitting the hand that's touching things. That's the new name of this icon. And then we can do things with our quick reverse button. And that one is in that group just below. I think I clicked that pretty fast. So we have the presser foot, we had the scissors, and then we have the presser foot button. So that's what I'm going to be pressing here. So then with the reverse, so reverse is just like I press on it, it does the stitch going backwards. The one that's next to it is actually a zigzag with a go back. What this does is, let's say we're doing a honeycomb stitch. And the honeycomb stitch is a specific stitch where a needle goes over, down, back, down, down, up, down. It makes this specific pattern. And if we decide we want to go in reverse, where we just use the regular reverse, it won't repeat that pattern perfectly as we go backwards. If we engage this button here, which looks like the zigzag and 2 arrows pointing up, that is actually going to go backwards in that honeycomb stitch exactly in the holes it previously stitched. And you do have this option on your machine when you're in the sewing mode. You don't have to program this onto your quick reverse, but that button in the sewing mode is in that special eye section of the stitches, and so you're having to take your hands off of your work for a longer period of time to find that, whereas if you program this on your quick reverse button, it's right there above the needle, so it gives you that opportunity to keep your hands on your work all the time. Does anybody have any questions so far? Listen, it's like, I swear there are 5 people back there. Well, no, 4, sorry. Okay, so now I'm gonna hit the breadcrumbs again. I'm going back to the hand that's touching things. And now we have another button. Now, first of all, I wanna take a moment to describe this button. And I really apologize. I know it's kind of hard to see these things here. Oh my gosh, this is the best camera work I've ever done. All right, so there is a button. If I hold it up here, if you see on this screen, there's a button at the top that looks like a right triangle with little dots at the bottom of it. That right triangle that is the symbol on a Bernina for pattern end. You see it a lot. It's not really pattern end, I'm sorry. It represents a stitch. So like the right triangle with either a line at the top, that's pattern begin, or a line at the bottom is pattern end, or sometimes you see that symbol flipped, that's mirror. So that is kind of Bernina's way of representing to you that means a stitch. So when we see that stitch up there and we click on it, sometimes we'll do a decorative stitch. Let's say it's hearts or little shamrocks, because today is St. Patrick's Day. So we're stitching along little shamrocks, and we want to end at a shamrock. We would hit pattern end, and we would hit, more than likely, that button that's up there that's external on our machine. So if we hit pattern end, it's going to just stop the stitch. But I just gave you a dirge on why you would want to do knotting on decorative stitching. So you can actually take that pattern end and you can make it knot. And you can choose your knotting feature, whether you want it to do the cross or you want it to do the little stitches close together. That's by, and when you engage one of these functions on these things, it actually puts a white ring around it. So you can do that. Or you can also engage the scissors and you can engage the foot up. So now we're stitching our shamrocks. We've decided we need to stop to make it knot. Then we're gonna end, so we want it to cut, and then we want it to lift the presser foot for us.
So you mean that all the function can do at a time using
Correct.
the buttons?
Yes. So what we're doing with this particular stitch here is I'm giving it multi-functions when I hit that button. Now, I also want to say that we can also give it multi-functions when we hit the thread cutter and so forth. It's just different ways to program it because you might at different times want these buttons to do different things. And the most important, and you might not even know now because I'm getting like a little confused look in the back. I think the most important thing is to play with it as you're working on something and then kind of determine how you would want to use that. And I have to say that I am like maybe a lemming. I like the machines as they come to me default setting. I'm like, okay, I'm fine. I totally accept that this is how it's gonna sew. But now as I've gotten to be a little bit more persnickety, I now like that I can adjust pattern end to cut and that I can adjust my thread cutter to do other things and stuff. But the most important thing is to maybe have scrap fabric with you when you go at home and you play with these things and see what they're physically doing and how you would use them in the real world. So now we're going to go back to the hand that's touching something, and we have needle down. And so we can do other things. So when the needle goes into the down position, it can automatically hover. And it can not hover, it can hover a little bit, or it can hover a lot. Can you think of any example where you stop sewing and the needle lands in the down position and you would want it to hover?
Return the corner.
Yeah, pivoting. That way you're not, getting a cramp in your thigh from using the freehand system. There's a lot of different applications, sometimes even for quilting. You want it to lift up on you so you can smooth the material out. I think this would be really nice when you're using the Bernina stitch regulator, especially without using the foot control or something like that. So you do have that ability. And you would just switch from one of these modes. So this one is the not hover, this one is the hover a little bit, and this one is the hover a lot. The hover a lot function would probably be best suited for really thick material. And so you can just pick the one that you like. And now we're gonna go back to the hand that's touching things again, and we have one more thing to set up, and that would be the knot. And we can literally have it knot with our 4 steps, or we can have it knot with little steps close together. And once again, it's your preference. And so, how do you feel about that little section that we did?
It's very cool.
Okay. So let's look at,
Gayle,
Yeah.
mine doesn't have the knot.
let me have a look. We do have a multiple different machines in the classroom here, so I'm just gonna take a little field trip back to our customer in the back. Our guest, not customer, you're our guest, our visitor. Oh, you don't have an external knot button.
Oh,
Okay, you have cut, you have foot up, you have the reverse, you have needle up down, but you don't have.
okay, all right. I was gonna say, I didn't think it was there.
All right, so some of the machines do not have the knot button, so of course you wouldn't be able to program it if you don't have a knot button. All right, so now we're going to look at some of these other things here. So now we want to go back to our gears, and we want to have the screen where we have other things that we can look at. So there was a question from one of our guests about what about embroidery settings? Well, see that hoop there on the screen? We're going to click that. And now this is where it will adjust tension for the embroidery. And now this will only adjust the tension in the embroidery. So like if you feel strongly that every time you're sitting down to embroider, you're having to loosen your upper tension or tighten your upper tension, this could be an option for you. I'm going to go back and hit my embroidery hoop up here in the breadcrumbs. And now let's look at speed. We can adjust our peak speed in embroidery. This might not be a bad idea if you're doing a long project where you've had to do super slow sewing. Can you think of a project where you might need to do super slow embroidery?
Anytime you use
Metallic thread, glow in the dark thread when you do your wizarding school stitch out. Another one would be the flash thread. So flash thread is great thread because it's made to be reflective. So when I made Camilla's collar, I actually did satin stitching on it. So when a light hits it in the dark, the thread glows. And we do have these threads here. We have the flash and the glow in the dark and metallic thread. And so I have whenever I do some sort of embroidery projects, this is the type of thing where you have to sew it slowly.
invisible thread.
Invisible thread too. In embroidery mode, I don't know if we'd really be using that so much, but water soluble thread possibly, fusible thread. There are some techniques with fusible thread where you can stitch with fusible and then you put gold leafing on top of it. This is beyond something that I've done yet, but you know, every day we try new projects. But anywho, so you can slow the peak speed of the machine down. Then we have other settings in embroidery. We have this feature where it, I want to show you something. I need to kind of go through this because this is a fairly new feature for me, but this one is centering the embroidery motif and restoring saved position. So this icon is activated by default. The selected embroidery motif is pretty much always centered, but you can actually engage this. Let's look at this. So centering the embroidery motif. The icon is deactivated by default. The selected embroidery motif is centered in the embroidery hoop. You touch the icon. An embroidery motif which has been moved and saved in this position will be opened in the saved position after having been selected. So this is a great feature. Can you think of why?
Telephone call and you have to leave
Yeah,
the machine
or you know, if
overnight.
you pull something into the hoop and you've moved it because you weren't like you didn't do the greatest job of centering the design, so you had to move it, then if you have it remember, then if for some reason the power goes out, numerous of other things happen, you can go back to that design exactly the way you were stitching it. All right, so then we have hoop calibration, where it's going to want you to lower the feed dogs, and oh dear, on my simulator, for reals. Okay, wants you to put on the hoop, or the embroidery module, got it. And now it wants you to put the hoop on, okay. My simulator is a little weird, I have to touch these different buttons. Okay, so the hoop calibration is really, you're gonna put your hoop on your machine, you're gonna put the template in, and then you're gonna move the arrows until the needle's right into the center of your hoop. So that's what we're doing in that case. So this is what you're gonna use, like if you buy a new hoop, if you buy a midi hoop, or you buy a maxi hoop or a jumbo hoop for your machine, mega hoop, you're gonna wanna calibrate the hoop to make sure that when the machine thinks that that design is centered, then the design is actually centered. Okay? And then we have thickness of material. This is where we can adjust. If we have super heavy material, we can select that and it'll make the adjustment. We have needle position or needle threading. Let me double check on this for you. Thread away, sorry. I made an oop. That's thread away. So some of the machines have a new feature called thread away. Sherlyn, your 780 is not gonna have this. You will have it on a plus model 790 or 880, a 700, 500. So thread away mode is something that you will definitely want to deactivate and something that you definitely will want to turn on. The thread away mode, if you've ever embroidered something and it has a lot of dots on it and it goes, you know, like maybe there's like 30 little dots, it's a speckled like mushroom or something that you're stitching out. When you don't have the thread away mode engaged, you may have like little jump stitches that you need to trim, or you may have like just, you know, it cuts it, but there's still a little hair left over. So the idea is thread away keeps the embroidery looking neat. And so the trade-off for this is when you have thread away mode underneath, it can look a little hairy. So if you're embroidering on something that's gonna go in a quilt, it doesn't matter if it looks hairy underneath. But if you're putting it on something where, you know, like a towel, where you will be turning it over or whatever, you probably will want to not engage thread away mode and have the normal mode engaged and just trim your little stitches. But that's where you would turn this on and off. Knotting before embroidery. I think you were interested in this one. So when we do the knotting in embroidery, we can turn it off at the beginning and we can turn it off at the end. So this is knotting at the beginning because you see the little pretzel here has dots after it, and then down here, the little pretzel has dots before it. So you can turn off your knotting features. And then we have cutting. We can tell the machine we don't want it to cut between colors. We can tell it that we don't want it to stop and cut our tail. And we can also give it a threshold for how long we want a stitch to be before the cutting is activated. So sometimes if it's just 1 millimeter apart, you don't even want to cut that. It's not worth it. And so you can adjust it. And 6 millimeters is about the default setting. But I would say that's fine. Have you noticed in embroidery when you're stitching that you know, a lot of times it cuts and then it just goes like 2 seconds over or 2 millimeters over and then it's starting again? That's the kind of design where I might go into here, into my settings, and just change it to be like, oh, don't cut it unless it's like 9 millimeters apart or whatever. And then finally, we have the measurement system, and we can convert the measurement system from millimeters to inches. So if we really want to know in inches, I find that with embroidery, it is so much easier to measure in millimeters because they're such small pieces. But if you really want to do it in inches, you can select your machine to interpret in inches rather than millimeters. So that was our embroidery. We covered all of those. Any questions about embroidery setup? Okay. They're very quiet. All right, so now we're going to go to settings. There, we did our little person, we did embroidery, we did stitching. Now we're going to things that we want to turn off. Can you think of an opportunity where you would want to turn your upper thread sensor off? Speak up, my dear.
Could you go one more? I mean, I think I lost it because I don't have that a spool of thread.
Okay, so we're gonna go to our settings,
Okay,
and we go to this little
Okay.
eye that represents the thread sensors, and we have a thread sensor for the upper thread, which is represented by a spool of thread, and then we have the bobbin sensor, which is represented by the bobbin. So the upper thread sensor, I don't want to 100% recommend this, but sometimes you might be in the middle of a project and your machine is telling you that your upper thread's broken and you know it's not and it's stitching well. To get through the project, you can turn the upper thread off so that you can just finish without it stopping a million times. But more than likely there is probably something setting off that sensor, so you'll need to have it looked at, but it gives you an opportunity to finish your project before you bring it in to have it looked at.
But you would want that on in case you run out of the.
It's true. So if you turned it off, you would have to monitor it very closely that you don't run out. Sometimes thread sends off the sensor. Monofilament thread can be one of these things that make your upper tension monitor go wacky. So you might need to turn it off for that. Same with the bobbin. There are just some weird threads that you might be using that are bad where it comes to the lower thread monitor. Another example is I sometimes don't have the capability to make copies of some paper piecing designs because my scanner is only so big and my printer is only so big, but some of the different patterns require a much larger paper piece of paper. Does that make sense? So I have actually taken the original paper piece design and layered it with several layers of tracing paper. And then I put no thread in my needle, no thread in the bobbin, and I stitch those lines. And I'm not using thread. So in that case, I don't want it to have a conniption fit at me. So, that's kind of archaic, but I've done it because it works better than going to Staples because I don't like to leave my house or my store. Okay, so now sounds. The machine, when you touch the buttons, you get little chirps and things like that. So you can actually change the noises that the machines make based on what you might be able to hear. I know every year I lose a little bit of hearing, so soon I'm gonna have to have a car horn beeping at me when I change my stitches, but let's just look at some of the, and now they're not gonna make a noise on my simulator, but each one of these makes a different noise. You can also turn off the beeping if it's annoying. So just, kind of touch those different noises to see what you like or you don't like. So the top row represents the straight stitching and the stitch selection. The middle row represents the different things that you can do to the stitches once you're in the little information button when you're into your stitching screen. And then also there's a Siren. I use that term very loosely, but there is a Bernina stitch regulator Siren when you have your Bernina stitch regulator on, and it will kind of scream at you if you're moving your hands too fast. You cannot change that noise, but you can turn it off because I tend to move really fast with the Bernina stitch regulator, so it's very annoying to hear it throughout the store, so I mute it. So that's, something that you can do. Does everybody understand that portion? Okay. And then finally, this area, I'm just gonna go through these. So what we hit when we were in our setup program is we hit the sewing machine. And this is where we can see certain things about our machine. You're learning a new language. Maybe this is a great way to kind of practice up on your French or your German by changing the language. Personally, I would be in a really bad way if somebody changed the language on mine because I'm horrible with languages, but this is where you can change that. Then we go to the sewing light, and then we can dim our screen brightness down, and we can also turn our light off, or we can change how bright the light is.
I mean the BERNINA 790 now they have the language. They have the Chinese language. But the 780 they don't.
It doesn't?
It only have the Japanese.
Oh, I
And
didn't know
Dutch.
that. I'm wondering if they're, let me look into that to see if that can be changed with an update,
Great.
okay? But I don't know, but I'll find out.
Thank you.
Then, don't hit this one, just let me do it. Oh, it's not even letting me on here. This one, it looks like a crayon hitting a square. That's screen calibration. And this is something that you can sometimes have an issue with. If you are sewing and you have a lot of static and you go to touch something and bzz, it can cause the screen to not be calibrated properly. So then when you go to hit stitch number 1 and it selects stitch number 2 instead, that can be a thing, all right? So that's what you want there. Then this one here is reset to factory settings. So what we would do here is we click it and it will delete. Don't touch this on your machines, but this will delete all of the special things that you've done to it. If we go here, it'll delete all of the special things you've done in your embroidery. And then if you click this, it will legitimately turn your machine into the way it came out of the factory.
Huh.
And this, you know, all electronic devices have this. Your iPhone has this. You can do a factory reset, and that's what this is. So now we go back to the sewing machine again, and we have a wrench. And we've used this often in our introduction to your machine class, where what we've done with this one is we've clicked on the brush, and the brush allows you to clean it out. It gives you instructions on how to clean the machine, how to shake out the thread cutter, and how to do all of those things. This one, the first one here, 3A, is actually going to tell you how to calibrate your buttonhole foot. The update, obviously, there are updates that come out often, and you can download the update on a USB stick and follow the instructions, and then that's where that comes in to play. When you click the update button, it'll also tell you what software version you have. In case you think that the update hasn't been added, you can double check on your computer. Then there's the oiling. It shows you where to oil your machine. And then there's the embroidery module, and it tells you how to pack up the embroidery module and park it so it's at the right position to be stored in your case or in your box. Then lastly, there's an I button, and this I button is information where you can learn what version you have. This might not mean anything to you, but it can mean something to the technician. And so this is where you can also see your total number of stitches, stitches since last maintenance, and total number of cut cycles since cleaning. So it kind of just gives you an idea of how much you're using your machine. Telephone number, this is where we actually log in the telephone number of the store when you bring it in for service. We didn't? Well, we will. We'll do it, Gayle. Oops, I'm not supposed to use names. All right, this is, you would put a USB stick in here to log issues with your machine. These are things that really you're not gonna pay attention to unless our tech department tells you to. Then we've got this button, the machine ID. They all have a special little ID button. And then once again, if we wanna upgrade, there's a button here to do so.
But the most of time, if we bring in to clean up and oil, you will help us to upgrade.
Yeah, we're looking at this information. The techs see it in a different way. They go into a service mode that you can't get to as a user. But we look at these things. This information, I think the most important one in this section is probably just the information about the machine with the number of stitches you have and everything. But this section is really meant more for more detailed things. I just want you to know it's there. And so
Does this stay, the number of stitches, does it stay there forever from the very beginning?
Yes. Yeah, it's like the odometer. You can't change it. It is what it is. So, now the Q series Berninas have a trip odometer and a permanent odometer. It's like, so like let's say somebody's using an industrial machine like the Q series quilting machine to do a project for someone. A lot of long arm quilters will charge by the stitch or by the group of stitches. So that has a built-in mechanism where you can say, hey, this stitch was 180,000 stitches. But these machines do not have that.
I've done 7 million
I
stitches.
know, my God, that's a lot. You do a lot of embroidery. 7 million stitches on one of these machines in here.
Almost 8.
That's great. So,
No
All-
wonder Daddy's went to one of those.
all right, so does anybody have any questions? Okay, all right. Let's have a look here. I need to look at our handout. All right, so we have a couple more things that we want to discuss. And that is the creative consultant and the saving stitches in the personal program. So the creative consultant, I'm going to get out of here. And the creative consultant is represented by a dress form. Does everybody have a dress form icon on their machine?
I don't know.
It's right
cannot,
there.
But I
Oh, we have to get out of this.
don't know.
Well, we're in Stitch Designer.
Hmm.
You know what we do when this happens? We turn it off and on again.
Okay.
And once it boots up, it's gonna be this button right
Okay.
there. Okay. Good. Excellent. Good, all right.
I have a stupid embarrassing question.
Okay.
When you click on something,
Uh-huh.
is it, when you wanna turn it on or off, is it red or
Red is off, green is on.
it is, okay, so whatever's showing
Yeah.
green.
So somebody just had a question, which is totally legitimate, is when you are selecting something and you want to turn it off or on, that I just wanted to reiterate that red turns it off and green activates it. So if something's green, then it's on, and if it's red, then it's off. So there is a creative consultant. It's represented by a dress form, and it's on one of these stitches on the side of your screen. It's not a stitch, sorry, it's a function on the side of the touch screen. And when you open it up, you have all of these different types of fabric that you can choose from. If you look at the different icons, there's a tight knit, there's a close woven, a medium woven, and a thick woven. So we're probably looking at the difference in like high thread count cotton, medium thread weight, possibly hand woven, thicker material, linen, things like that. Then we've got top stitching. We've got small knit, medium knit, bulky knit. We've got outerwear. We've got fabrics with pile. Fabrics with pile would be terry cloth, velvet, things like that. Well, actually, fabrics with loopies, then there's actually even a terry or a velvet setting right here. Then this little funny symbol, this is really actually hide. So that would be leather, possibly some pleathers and other things like that. Then the one next to it would be lace. And
Is
lace.
this for embroidery or just
This is for,
sewing?
right now, it's just what kind of material we're working with.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just click one of these things. Let's click lace, for instance. So now, that was a good question. It's like you're my little plant, because here is our, I'm looking at myself on this camera, and this book behind me looks like I'm balancing a book on my head perfectly. I'm sorry, I'm very distracted. Okay, all right, so in this case, we've picked lace. So this would be putting a hem in the lace. This would be overcasting the lace. This would be blind hemming lace, buttonholes, zippers, and embroidery. So let's select embroidery as our example. So we want to embroider on lace. So now the creative consultant is telling us what stitch we should use, what needle, what kind of thread, and then what kind of foot. Oh, sorry about this. This isn't embroidery. This is for regular sewing. So it's if I guess if we wanted to do decorative stitches on lace, that's what it's telling us to use. And then once we do it, it sets up a stitch, for instance. Let's go back. And let's go back to our creative consultant. And let's pick an outerwear. And let's pick how to put a zipper in. And it's going to recommend a stitch. It's going to recommend a needle, the kind of thread, and the foot. Then we say okay. And there it's picked the foot. It's picked everything the way it wants us to stitch out with it.
How about the pants, the jean pants?
Let's look. So we're going to look for jeans. I'm not sure what jeans would be. Probably a bulky, heavy weight here. Doing some top stitching possibly, or some seaming.
What was the one with the pocket? Maybe that.
So pocket, let's do some stitching, or maybe, yeah, so now it's recommending one, a thicker needle, the kind of thread, and the foot. It's not, I mean, there's many different projects that we would do. These are just something to help you get started. And so that's what the creative consultant is there to help you do. So now, one thing I want to, we are going to change our foot here, and I'm just going to go to a standard sewing foot, which would be foot number 1. Like I said, I want to pick foot number 1. I think there might be an issue with my simulator.
You didn't change the material.
I don't think I need to at this point. But, I'm just going to pick this one. Okay. So one of the things that we can also do is if some of you are doing a project where you are doing lots of different things with it. So for instance, stitch number 2, which is normally a zigzag stitch, I like to make it a satin stitch. So I tend to stitch with my zigzag stitch at about 0.3, 0.4, something like that. So you can adjust it. You can also adjust the width, and you can adjust the needle position. So let's say I want to save that. So every time I go to use that stitch, I go into my I button, or I'm sorry. Boop, made an oop. I'm going to go into my heart button, and I'm going to save it. That symbol is represented by a folder with an arrow pointing into it. So now when I save that, I get the option of some stitch banks, and then I can pick a stitch bank that I want to put it in, and then I say okay. And now I can go along with my life, and I can stitch with my honeycomb stitch. I can go back to my regular 2 stitch and press clear, but then when I want my satin stitch, I can go back to my heart, and now I'm going to retrieve the design, and that's going to be in the first folder, and now I save it, and it remembered. Do we have any questions about that?
It's a lot to remember.
I know. It is. And most thing is just to play with it, remember I showed you can go back to the factory settings. If you do too much, just go back, start fresh, it's fine. But, you know,
Gayle,
yes.
on the screen, when you adjust the width, it's red,
What do you have on your machine? What foot?
the one.
Do you have the straight stitch plate on your machine?
Yes.
Then go down to your straight stitch and select the zigzag stitch or plate or the 9mm stitch plate, and then it won't be red.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, we had a great class today. We were scheduled to go until noon, but it looks like we're going to wrap up now. Now, I do want you to know that I'm going to try my best to see if I can save this video. For our next video, I'm going to try to have a little bit better camera on our screen. But I wanted to kind of give this a try as our first go because we want to kind of go in this direction for a little bit. And hopefully you like it. You know, with everything, there's always room for improvement. I know you're probably sick of looking at my face on this video this whole time, but I would like to very much thank our students who came out to be a part of the class today and ask questions. And also in the future, we will have a monitor that will monitor our Twitch feed to be able to answer your questions while we're going live. But this was the first time, not the last one. So thank you very much, everybody, and happy sewing.